The first time Elias Crow saw the sky of Kael'thra, he thought it was on fire. Not in the way Earth's sunsets burned red and gold, but in slow-moving bands of violet and pale green that rippled like living things across the heavens. Massive moons hung low, one cracked like an old scar, another perfectly smooth and glowing faintly from within. The air itself shimmered, heavy with unfamiliar scents, metallic ozone, crushed leaves, and something sweet he couldn't name. Elias adjusted the strap of his medical pack and took a careful step forward. He was not supposed to be here. 3 months earlier, the United Terran Coalition had issued a standing order: no civilian contact with the Kael'thari Empire. The Kael'thari were powerful, territorial, and, according to every military briefing Elias had skimmed and ignored, emotionally unpredictable. Their queen ruled absolutely, their warriors were infamous, and their justice was swift. None of that had mattered when Elias found the child. She had been lying in the wreckage of a downed Kael'thari scout craft on the edge of a disputed asteroid belt. His own ship, a battered medical transport, had picked up a faint distress signal. He had assumed it was a malfunctioning beacon or a trapped pilot. Instead, he found a girl. She was small, no more than 8 or 9 by human standards, with pale silver skin and eyes like polished obsidian. Bioluminescent markings flickered weakly along her arms and neck, pulsing in uneven rhythms. One of her legs was badly injured, the armor fused into flesh by heat. She should have been dead. Elias remembered kneeling beside her, hands shaking, heart pounding as every warning screamed in his head. Alien. Hostile species. Do not interfere. But she had looked at him. Her eyes had focused, just barely, and she had reached out with trembling fingers. When she spoke, her voice was a thin, broken whisper translated imperfectly by his ship's universal linguistics module. Mother. That was all it took. Elias had carried her aboard his ship, cut away melted plating, and worked for hours in zero gravity, guided by half-complete medical data and instinct. He improvised splints, used nanogel meant for human tissue, and prayed it wouldn't poison her. He stayed awake for 2 days straight, monitoring her vitals, adjusting oxygen levels, and whispering reassurances she probably couldn't understand. When Kael'thari warships appeared on his scanners, he had been certain he would die. Instead, they let him go. No weapons fire. No pursuit. Just a silent escort to the edge of the system, where a single transmission followed him before cutting off entirely. The Queen will remember this. Now, standing within the heart of Kael'thra itself, Elias wondered if that had been a promise or a threat. The palace of the alien queen was not a building so much as a living structure grown from crystal and bone. Vast arches curved overhead, their surfaces etched with faintly glowing symbols that shifted when he tried to focus on them. The floor was warm beneath his boots, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Rows of Kael'thari warriors lined the hall, tall and imposing, their armor seamlessly fused to their bodies. Their eyes tracked his every movement. Not one spoke. At the far end of the chamber, elevated on a dais that seemed to grow organically from the floor, sat the queen. Queen Zyreth. She was taller than the others, her presence undeniable. Her crown was not worn but grown, a halo of crystalline spines that refracted the light into sharp, prismatic patterns. Her eyes were a deep, ancient violet, and the bioluminescent markings along her face and arms glowed steadily, strong and controlled. Beside her stood a young Kael'thari girl. Alive. Healthy. Her markings shone bright and playful now, shifting colors as she shifted her weight. Her injured leg had been fully regenerated, encased in sleek, elegant armor. When her gaze landed on Elias, her eyes widened. She smiled. "Human," she called out, her voice clear and strong. "You came." A ripple moved through the hall. Surprise, disbelief, something like restrained shock. Elias swallowed hard and inclined his head, the way he'd practiced during the long, anxious journey here. "Your Majesty," he said, hoping the translator captured the respect he intended. "I was summoned. I came as requested." Queen Zyreth did not move. Her gaze remained fixed on him, intense enough to make his skin prickle. "You stand before the throne of Caelthra," she said at last, her voice resonating through the chamber without the need for amplification. "A world that has not welcomed a human in over a century. Do you know why?" Elias chose his words carefully. "Because your people have little reason to trust mine." A faint flicker of something crossed her expression. Amusement? Approval? "Trust is not given lightly," the Queen said. "Especially to those who trespass into our borders, violate our laws, and interfere with our blood." The warriors shifted subtly. Elias felt his heart rate spike, but forced himself to remain still. "I did not know who she was," he said quietly. "I only knew she was dying." The child, Princess Lyri, stepped forward before the Queen could respond. "Mother," she said, tugging lightly at the Queen's arm. "He's the one. The human. He fixed me. He stayed when I was scared." The Queen looked down at her daughter, and for just a moment, the ironclad ruler vanished. In her place was a mother. "You are certain?" Zyreth asked softly. Lyri nodded vigorously. "He sang, too." "Badly." Elias winced despite himself. A few Caelthari guards emitted something like a startled hiss. Laughter, perhaps. Queen Zyreth looked back at Elias. "Do you understand," she said, her tone sharpening once more, "what it means to save the life of the Queen's only daughter?" Elias met her gaze. "I understand that I did what anyone should do." Silence fell. Then the Queen stood. The sound echoed like thunder. She descended the dais slowly, each step deliberate. Warriors tensed as she approached him, but she raised one hand, and they froze instantly. Up close, she was overwhelming. Taller than he'd realized, her presence pressed against him like gravity itself. Elias resisted the urge to step back. "You risked your life," she said. "Your freedom. Your species' fragile peace. For a child who could have been your enemy." "She wasn't my enemy," Elias replied. "She was hurt." The Queen studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she bowed. It was not deep, not submissive, but it was unmistakably a gesture of respect. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. "Caelthari law demands balance," Queen Zyreth said. "A life for a life. A debt for a debt." Elias's stomach tightened. "I didn't do it for a reward." "And yet," she continued, "the debt exists." She turned, addressing her court. "This human saved Princess Lyri when our fleets failed her, when fate abandoned her. By our oldest laws, his life is now bound to mine." Bound. Elias felt the weight of that word settle heavily on his chest. The Queen faced him once more. "You will not be harmed. You will not be imprisoned. Instead, you'll be offered a choice." A choice was better than an execution, at least. "You may return to your people," she said, "bearing our mark of protection. No Caelthari blade will ever be raised against you." Or, she paused, "you may remain." A murmur surged through the hall. "Remain?" Elias echoed. "As honored guest," Zyreth clarified. "And advisor. You see what we do not. You act where we hesitate. My daughter's survival proves this." Lyri beamed at him, clearly pleased by the idea. Elias's mind raced. To stay meant abandoning Earth, his ship, the life he knew. To leave meant walking away from a people who had just placed their trust in him, and from a child who had already decided he was important. "What happens if I refuse both?" he asked carefully. The queen's eyes softened, just a fraction. "Then Kael'thera will mourn the loss of an opportunity." Elias exhaled slowly. He thought of the moment he'd found Leary in the wreckage, of her whispered word, of the way she'd smiled at him just now, alive and unafraid. "I'll stay," he said. The hall went utterly silent. Queen Zyreth nodded once. "Then let it be known," she declared, "that the human Elias Crow stands under my protection. From this moment forward, his life is intertwined with the fate of Kael'thera." Leary rushed forward and hugged his leg without hesitation. Elias laughed softly, surprised to find his eyes burning. High above them, the living palace pulsed brighter, its glow spreading outward into the alien sky. And across the stars, the story began to travel. The story of the human who saved her daughter and stood unbroken before the alien queen. The days that followed Elias Crow's decision passed like a dream he half expected to wake from. He was given chambers within the palace, living quarters grown rather than built, walls that responded subtly to his presence, adjusting temperature and light without visible mechanisms. Kael'theri attendants moved quietly, observing him with open curiosity rather than hostility. News of his choice spread fast. Wherever he walked, bioluminescent eyes followed. Some glowed with suspicion, others with awe. Princess Leary became his constant shadow. She asked endless questions about Earth, about rain and oceans and animals that didn't glow. She laughed when he showed her old star maps and insisted that humans had terrible fashion sense. Elias found himself smiling more than he had in years. But beneath the calm, something was shifting. Kael'thera was not a peaceful empire by nature. Power was respected, but strength was questioned constantly. Whispers moved through the court, questions about why a human stood under royal protection, why the queen had been tradition, why the life debt had not been repaid through blood or exile. Elias felt it in the way some warriors watched him too closely. Queen Zyreth felt it too. On the seventh cycle after Elias's arrival, the queen summoned the High Council. They gathered in the same vast chamber, but the atmosphere was sharper now, tense like a blade pulled halfway from its sheath. Elder commanders and bioseers stood in a wide circle, their markings pulsing in deliberate patterns. "The human remains," one elder said bluntly. "His presence destabilizes our order." "He saved the princess," another countered. "That cannot be dismissed. Nor can weakness be rewarded," a third snapped. Queen Zyreth listened in silence. At last she spoke. "Call him," she said. Elias entered moments later, aware that this was no longer a courtesy meeting. Leary was absent. That alone told him how serious this was. "You question my judgment," the queen said to the council. "So, let us remove doubt." She turned to Elias. "Tell them," she said. "Tell them what you did when my daughter lay dying." Elias hesitated, then spoke plainly. He described the wreckage, the bleeding, the impossible odds, the fear of doing harm, and the certainty that doing nothing would kill her. "I didn't know your laws," he finished. "I didn't know who she was. I only knew she needed help. If that's weakness, then I won't pretend otherwise." Silence followed. Then one of the elder warriors stepped forward. "You had no obligation," the warrior said slowly. "Yet you acted." "Yes," Elias replied. "And if she had died under your hands?" "I would have stayed," Elias said, "and faced whatever came. I wouldn't have run." That answer changed something. The queen felt it ripple through the chamber. Kael'theri respected courage, but they revered accountability. Queen Zyreth raised her voice. "Strength is not measured only by conquest," she declared. It is measured by what one protects when no law demands it. She turned back to Elias. There is one final debt, she said. One that must be balanced before the court. Elias straightened. Name it. You will stand before my people, she said, not as a guest but as a witness. The ceremony took place at dawn. Under the burning violet sky, thousands gathered in the open terraces of the capital. Elias stood beside the queen, the weight of history pressing down on him harder than fear ever had. Princess Lyri was brought forward. Alive, strong, radiant. She lives, Queen Zairath proclaimed, because compassion crossed the stars. Then she did something no Kael'thari ruler had done in recorded memory. She placed her hand on Elias's shoulder. By my authority, she said, the life debt is fulfilled. Gasps echoed like thunder. The human owes us nothing, the queen continued. And yet, he remains by choice. She turned to Elias, her voice lowering. You came here as a healer, she said. You will leave your mark as something more. Before he could speak, Princess Lyri stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him again. My hero, she declared proudly. Laughter, real laughter, rolled through the gathered crowd. In that moment, something ancient shifted. Trade corridors opened weeks later. Hostilities cooled. Messages crossed borders that had been silent for generations. The story spread fast, told and retold across star systems. Not of weapons, not of conquest, but of a human who found a dying child in the dark and chose to care. Years later, when Elias finally returned to Earth, he did not return alone. A Kael'thari envoy accompanied him, bearing symbols of alliance, not threat. And when historians asked Queen Zairath why she trusted a species once considered dangerous and unpredictable, her answer was simple. Because one of them taught us, she said, that mercy can be stronger than fear. And far across the stars, Princess Lyri would grow into a ruler shaped not only by Kael'thari tradition, but by the memory of a human who stood before her mother without weapons, without power, and changed the fate of empires by saving a single life.